So, if you were to walk up to an absolute beginner in English, like someone who maybe knows how to say hello, goodbye, and point to a cup of coffee, and you just spoke to them for, I don't know, 1 minute using normal everyday sentences.
Right, just a regular conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Their brain wouldn't just struggle. It would like literally start dropping words like a leaky bucket.
Oh, absolutely. Total system failure.
By the time you reach the end of your third sentence, their working memory would have forcibly deleted the beginning of your first sentence just to keep the whole mental system from crashing.
It's a complete neurological pileup.
It really is. And today, we are doing a deep dive into a document that essentially functions as this, well, it feels like a highly classified blueprint for preventing that exact cognitive crash.
Yeah, it's a fascinating piece of source material.
It proves why silence specifically, like a mandated, agonizing 5-second silence, might just be the single most powerful tool in human communication.
It is a totally radical document when you really dig into it because what we are analyzing today isn't, it's not a textbook.
Mhm.
It is a strictly engineered set of instructions, and it's designed to dictate the exact behavior of an audio teacher who is guiding a student at the A2 level of English.
And A2, for those who don't know, that's the elementary stage.
Exactly. You are no longer at absolute zero. You have a handful of vocabulary words floating around in your head, but you are very much in the shallow end of the pool.
Right, you're barely swimming.
Yeah. Attempting to string those isolated words into a real-time thought feels like, well, it feels like trying to run a marathon underwater.
Oh, that's a great way to put it. And honestly, anyone listening to this has likely experienced that exact sensation.
Oh, for sure. With a language or anything else.
Totally. Like you decide you are going to learn a new language or maybe tackle some wildly complex new software system for your job.
Ugh, is the worst.
Right. You sit down armed with all this motivation, and within like 10 minutes, you hit this impenetrable wall of information.
The brick wall.
The rules contradict each other, the jargon is flying at you, and that initial enthusiasm violently shifts into this crushing, overwhelming feeling of, I am never ever going to understand this.
That is actually the biological panic response kicking in.
Wait, really? It's biological.
Oh, yeah. In linguistics, we call it the affective filter. It just skyrockets. Your amygdala actually perceives the cognitive overload as a literal threat.
Wow, so your brain is treating a Spanish lesson like a saber-toothed tiger.
Pretty much. And what this source material provides is essentially a psychological hazmat suit for that exact learning environment.
A psychological hazmat suit. I love that.
Yeah, and we are going to deconstruct this framework because honestly, it goes so far beyond just teaching English.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to understand how this blueprint protects the learner, we really have to look at the incredibly strict guardrails it places on the teacher before the lesson even officially begins.
Right. The setup is everything here.
The document calls this the speaking style. And I want to be clear to you listening, these are not polite suggestions. They are absolute mandates.
Strict rules of engagement.
Exactly. First, the teacher must speak slowly and clearly, which, sure, standard advice, right?
Sure, you expect that.
But then we hit the structural limitations. Sentence length is strictly capped. The teacher is forbidden from using fewer than 5 words.
Which is interesting on its own.
Right. And absolutely forbidden from using more than 12 words per sentence.
Which, if you think about it, is a profound restriction on human expression.
It is a conversational straitjacket. I read that and immediately tried to police my own internal monologue to stay under 12 words, and it is exhausting.
It's incredibly hard for native speakers.
We naturally speak in paragraphs.
Mm.
We use run-on sentences, we layer in dependent clauses, we just meander to find our point.
We do. It's how we think out loud.
So forcing yourself to slice every thought into a 5 to 12 word chunk feels incredibly unnatural. I understand keeping things simple, but isn't there a risk here?
A risk of what?
Of making the language sound robotic? Like, are we just feeding them artificial baby talk instead of exposing them to the real world?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture of how human memory actually functions, that 12-word limit isn't just arbitrary pacing, it is a neurological necessity.
Okay, break that down for me.
Think of human working memory like the RAM in a computer, whereas your long-term memory is the hard drive.
Right, RAM is the short-term active stuff.
Exactly. RAM is meant for quick, temporary processing, and it has a very strict physical capacity. Back in the 1950s, cognitive psychologist George Miller proposed this famous theory.
Is this the magic number 7 thing?
Yes, the magical number 7. He proposed that the average human can hold about 7 items plus or minus 2 in their working memory at any given time.
Okay, so 7 items. But what defines an item?
That's the crucial part. For a native speaker, an item might be an entire conceptual phrase like, the boy walked the dog. That's one concept.
Got it. It chunks together.
Right. But for an A2 language learner, an item is a single solitary word. They do not process a sentence as a fluid concept. They are processing it word by word by word.
Oh, wow. So they are using up a RAM slot for every single syllable, basically.
Yes. They are desperately holding word number 1 in their RAM while trying to translate word number 5.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. If you deliver a 20-word sentence to an A2 learner, you have wildly exceeded their RAM capacity. The buffer overflows.
So what happens when the buffer overflows?
The brain, in an act of literal self-preservation, drops the first half of the sentence into the abyss so it has room to process the end of the sentence.
It just deletes it.
It just
Yeah.
deletes it. The 5 to 12 word limit ensures that the entire thought can be held in the working memory buffer long enough for the brain to successfully decode the meaning.
And then transfer it to the hard drive.
Exactly.
So it's not about dumbing the language down at all. It's about respecting the literal biological bandwidth of the listener.
That is a perfect way to phrase it.
Like, if I'm explaining how to connect to the Wi-Fi to my grandfather, and I fire off a 30-word sentence about routers and IP addresses, I shouldn't be frustrated when he looks at me blankly.
Right, because you overflowed his buffer.
I flooded his RAM with alien code.
You really did. And this document forces the teacher to operate strictly within the bounds of the learner's cognitive hardware. And honestly, it goes further than just sentence length.
Oh yeah, it gets stricter.
The framework explicitly bans difficult grammar.
Ugh.
And crucially, it completely outlaws the use of idioms, unless absolutely unavoidable.
And even then, they have to be painfully simplified.
Correct.
See, I have to push back on the idiom ban. Idioms are like the flavor of a language.
They are, but they're dangerous for beginners.
But if you don't teach someone what under the weather or piece of cake means, aren't you setting them up to fail the second they step off a plane in London or New York?
You are hitting on the most fiercely debated topic in language pedagogy right now. The war between authentic input and curated input.
Okay, authentic versus curated.
Yeah. Do you throw them in the deep end with the chaotic, messy reality of the language, or do you build them a sterile, chlorinated wading pool?
And this document is definitely team wading pool.
This blueprint unequivocally chooses the wading pool. The text explicitly states its overarching philosophy, and I'm paraphrasing a bit, but it's focus on speaking confidence more than grammar perfection.
Okay, but I still don't see how banning idioms builds confidence.
Because an idiom isn't just vocabulary, it is cultural cryptography.
Cultural cryptography.
No, it requires a 2-step decoding process.
Yeah.
Let's say I tell an A2 learner, it's raining cats and dogs.
Which is a completely insane phrase if you've never heard it.
Exactly. So step 1 is linguistic decoding. The learner successfully translates the words raining, cats, and dogs.
Okay, they got the words.
Right. But step 2 is semantic synthesis. The learner tries to visualize animals falling from the sky, realizes it makes absolutely zero logical sense, and their brain just stalls.
Right, because to understand that idiom, you need the cultural key that unlocks the non-literal meaning.
Precisely. At the A2 level, forcing a learner to simultaneously manage linguistic translation and cultural cryptography, it causes a total system failure.
They know all the words, but they still fail the comprehension test, which just makes them feel stupid.
And that is the death knell of learning. If an A2 learner feels stupid, that effective filter slams shut, anxiety spikes, and they quit. The game is over.
So by stripping out idioms and enforcing those 12-word maximums, the framework is making a highly calculated trade-off.
A very deliberate one.
It is knowingly sacrificing authentic native complexity in exchange for a massive reduction in learner anxiety. You are trading linguistic purity for psychological safety.
That is exactly what's happening.
Okay, so we've essentially built the scaffolding now. The teacher is trapped in a protective 12-word box, stripped of all cultural flair, acting as this accessible, highly controlled data stream.
Right, the environment is secure.
So how did the blueprint actually initiate the learning process without triggering the panic we discussed? Because you still have to teach them something new.
It starts with the architecture of entry, which the document outlines as steps 1 and 2. Step 1 is the warm-up.
And it is strictly timed, right?
Very strictly, 1 to 2 minutes maximum. And the instructions mandate 3 specific things. First, introduce the topic. Second, explicitly state exactly what the learner will be able to do by the end of the lesson.
And the third.
Ask 2 highly accessible questions.
I find that explicit statement of the goal really interesting. Why is it so crucial to say, today you will learn how to order a coffee? Why not just start talking about coffee shops and let the theme reveal itself naturally?
Because the human brain operates on mental schemas.
Mental schemas, what is that, like a framework?
Essentially, a schema is a cognitive filing cabinet. When you are thrust into a novel, high-stress learning environment, surprises burn massive amounts of cognitive energy.
Oh, I see.
If I just start talking about espresso machines out of nowhere, your brain is frantically scrambling in the dark trying to figure out which filing cabinet to open.
Right, you're thinking, are we talking about mechanics? Are we talking about agriculture, business?
Exactly. But by explicitly stating the destination up front, today you will learn how to order a coffee. You eliminate the scramble.
You were basically telling the brain, hey, go to the filing cabinet labeled restaurants and beverages, open the drawer, and prepare to receive new files.
Precisely. It primes the neural pathways. It pulls up whatever existing native language knowledge the learner has about ordering food.
Which creates a comfortable landing pad for the foreign vocabulary that is about to arrive.
You have mapped the territory before asking them to take a single step.
That makes so much sense. And those 2 easy questions at the end of the warm-up?
They serve as a vital diagnostic check, for sure. But more importantly, they are an immediate confidence boost.
It signals, hey, you already have some tools in your toolbox. You aren't starting from zero today.
Exactly. It lowers the effective filter before the real work begins.
Which perfectly sets the stage for step 2, vocabulary delivery. And I have to say, reading this section of the source material, it felt like reading an instruction manual for defusing a bomb.
The precision is wild, isn't it?
The granularity is staggering. It outlines an unbreakable 5-step process for every single important word. Let me just map this out for you listening.
Go for it.
Step 1, pronounce the word clearly. Step 2, explain it in simple English. Step 3, give one easy example. Step 4, ask the learner to repeat it out loud.
And then comes the big one.
And step 5, pause for exactly 5 seconds.
It is the focal point of the entire methodology.
I am fascinated and frankly slightly horrified by this mandatory 5-second pause.
Most native speakers are.
I want everyone listening to this deep dive right now to imagine being in a conversation, asking someone a question, and then sitting in absolute silence for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds.
It feels like an eternity.
In the real world, a 5-second silence is agonizing. It signals that someone dropped the conversational ball, or someone is angry, or the social dynamic is just breaking down.
It's deeply uncomfortable.
So why is this document demanding an eternity of dead air after every single repetition?
Because you are projecting the rules of social conversation onto the mechanics of neuroplasticity.
Okay, guilty as charged. Explain the difference.
In a social setting, yes, silence is a threat. But in an instructional environment, particularly a purely audio-based environment where you lack visual cues like nodding or facial expressions, that 5-second pause is a sanctuary.
A sanctuary.
It is the secret weapon of the entire framework, because it is the exact window of time required for the brain to perform 3 distinct, highly complex operations.
Okay, I need you to break those operations down for me. What is
Yeah.
actually happening in the brain during those 5 seconds of silence?
Sure. So during seconds 1 and 2, you have the mental translation phase. Even at the A2 level, the learner is not thinking natively in English yet.
Right, they're still translating back and forth.
Exactly. So when the teacher says the word restaurant, the learner's brain has to hunt down the equivalent word in their mother tongue to verify the semantic meaning. That cognitive search takes a moment.
Okay, so by second 2, the meaning is locked in. What about seconds 3 and 4?
That is the physical vocalization phase. Learning a language isn't just an intellectual exercise, it is an intensely physical motor skill.
Like learning to play the guitar.
Yes, You are asking the learner to map new unfamiliar sounds onto their vocal cords, their lips, and their tongue.
Which they've never done before.
Right. So the motor cortex has to formulate a plan, send the signal to the muscles, and physically push the air out to repeat the word. That mechanical execution requires time.
Okay, which leaves second number 5, the final second of silence.
The cognitive reset. Once the word is spoken, the brain needs a fractional moment to register the success of the output, clear the RAM we talked about earlier, and prepare itself to receive the next incoming data stream.
Wow. So if a teacher rushes this process, if they only leave a 2-second pause before introducing the next vocabulary word, what happens?
It triggers a catastrophic cognitive pileup.
Because the learner is still trying to physically pronounce word A while the teacher is already downloading the definition of word B into their ears.
Exactly. And the resulting friction just destroys the learning process. We are so terrified of dead air as communicators. We view silence as a void that needs to be filled.
We really do. We just babble to fill the space.
But this blueprint recognizes that the teacher speaking is merely the setup. The silence is the execution. The silence is where the actual learning physically occurs in the brain.
That completely reframes the entire concept of teaching for me. The silence isn't a break from the lesson. The silence is the lesson.
Spot on.
Okay, so we've primed the learner. We've spoon-fed them isolated vocabulary words, shielded by these glorious 5-second buffers.
Mhm.
But language doesn't happen in a vacuum.
No, it doesn't.
We don't communicate in single words. So how does the document transition the listener from the safety of isolated vocabulary into the chaos of connected narratives?
This brings us to step 3, listening practice. And true to form, the framework maintains intense, suffocating control over the environment.
Of course it does.
The instruction is to introduce a short story incorporating the new vocabulary. But the mandated word count for this story is astonishingly strict. It has to be 40 to 80 words. No more, no less.
See, I physically double-checked the source material when I read that. 40 to 80 words is nothing.
It's tiny.
A standard tweet is longer than that. It is barely 3 or 4 sentences. Why go to all the trouble of setting up a narrative structure if you're only going to speak for 15 seconds?
It seems fleeting to us, sure. But remember the math we established in the speaking style section. The teacher is bound to a 5 to 12 word limit per sentence.
Oh, right.
So a 40 to 80 word narrative represents 4 to 8 consecutive sentences of sustained, unbroken foreign language input. For a brain at the A2 level, that is a marathon.
I didn't think about it like that.
Anything longer than 80 words and cognitive fatigue sets in. The brain simply stops processing the audio and starts treating it as background noise.
Like the adults in the Charlie Brown cartoons. Wah, wah, wah.
Exactly. But what's even more important than the length is the execution rule. The story is never just read once.
Right, the dual speed approach. The document dictates that the story must be read exactly twice. First, it is read slowly, and then immediately after it is read again at a natural pace.
Which is a brilliant mechanism.
I'm struggling to see the logic here, honestly. Why not just read it at a slightly modified middle ground pace a couple of times? Why the violent shift in gears?
What's fascinating here is that the two distinct reading speeds are targeting completely different auditory processing mechanisms in the listener's brain.
Okay, let's break that down.
When the story is read slowly the first time, the learner is engaging in conscious, bottom-up processing, specifically phonetic decoding.
Bottom-up processing, meaning they are starting at the smallest pieces and trying to build the whole picture.
Exactly. They are actively hunting through the slow audio stream for those specific isolated vocabulary words they just mastered in step 2.
Oh, so they're listening for the boundaries.
Yes. They are listening for the distinct boundaries between words. They're thinking, there's the word menu. Okay, there's the word waiter.
They are identifying the islands of meaning in what otherwise feels like a terrifying ocean of sound.
That's a very poetic way to say it, but yes, they are proving to themselves that they can actually hear the words in context.
Okay, but then why do the second reading fast?
Because if a learner only ever listens to artificially slow speech, they will be utterly helpless in the real world. Real human speech doesn't have neat little pauses between words.
Right, real speech has prosody. It has a rhythm, a melody, and intonation.
Words bleed into one another, consonants get dropped. So the second reading, at a natural pace, completely shifts the cognitive focus.
Because they already know the plot of the 80-word story. The mystery of the content is gone.
Precisely. The semantic burden has been lifted. The brain isn't working overtime to figure out what is happening in the story.
So what is the brain doing instead?
Now, the brain is freed up to engage in talk-down processing. The ear is training itself to hear the rhythm of the language. They are learning how the word want and the word to violently smash together in natural speech to sound like wanna.
That makes total sense. The slow reading secures the comprehension, and the natural reading secures the acquisition of authentic rhythm.
It's like learning a piece of music.
Yeah. You play it at half tempo to make sure your fingers hit the right keys, and then you play it at full speed to actually feel the groove of the song.
That is the exact same neurological process.
And following this dual speed story, the text demands 3 comprehension questions. And I don't even need to ask what happens after every single one of those questions.
And the mandatory 5-second pause.
The heartbeat of the blueprint returns. Okay, so up until this exact moment in the lesson, the listener has been living in a very safe, heavily padded room.
Very comfortable.
They've been receiving input. They've been listening, decoding, mimicking isolated sounds. But steps 4 and 5 represent a massive pivot. We move from passive listening to the absolute most terrifying frontier of language acquisition.
Generating active output.
It's so scary.
This is the moment where the affective filter we discussed earlier usually goes into absolute overdrive. Receptive language, understanding what someone else says, is one thing.
Because you can kind of guess from context.
Right. But expressive language, pulling thought from your own brain, translating it into foreign grammar, and pushing it out of your mouth is an entirely different neurological beast.
Step 4 bridges this gap with speaking practice. The teacher asks simple, open-ended questions based on the topic. The examples in the source are brilliantly non-threatening, actually.
Things like, what do you think?
Yeah. What do you usually do? Which one do you like?
It's impossible to be factually wrong when answering these.
Which removes the fear of failure.
But here's where we hit what I think is the most bizarre, fascinating part of the entire document. Step 5 is called conversation practice. This is wild.
The instructions tell the teacher to initiate a dialogue with a wild twist. I'm going to quote the source exactly here. First, you speak. Then, leave my part blank. Wait 5 seconds. Continue naturally. Do this for 5 to 8 turns. End quote.
The simulated conversation.
It sounds utterly absurd. I am picturing an interactive audio play, or like a theatrical fill-in-the-blank, where the teacher says a line, there is 5 seconds of dead air, where the listener is supposedly talking to the void, and then the teacher just cheerfully keeps going.
Yes, exactly like that.
How can a dialogue possibly continue naturally when the audio teacher has absolutely no earthly idea what the listener actually said during that 5-second silence?
It seems like magic, doesn't it?
What if the listener asked a question? What if they insulted the teacher?
It is the illusion of interaction. And structurally, it is a stroke of pedagogical genius. You have to look at the psychological progression here.
Okay, walk me through it.
Step 4 warmed up the vocal cords with those universal low-stakes questions. The learner got used to the physical act of forming a spontaneous thought. Step 5 is taking that physical act and placing it inside the rhythmic structure of a real conversation. It is a controlled simulation.
But how does the script account for the total unpredictability of the listener's blank space?
By engineering the teacher's prompts to be universally accommodating. The teacher uses highly predictive conversational formulas.
Give me an example of that.
For example, the audio teacher might say, I think I'll order the pasta today. What are you going to get? Then we have the 5-second void.
Okay, and during that void?
The learner might say pizza. They might say, I don't know. Or they might panic and say absolutely nothing.
Right.
The teacher's follow-up line is designed to validate the exchange regardless of the input. They'll say, oh, that sounds like a great choice. Should we get an appetizer too?
Ah, so the audio track is bulldozing forward, but in a way that perfectly frames whatever the listener just did as a success.
Exactly. It forces the learner into the cadence of a back-and-forth exchange. But critically, and this is the genius part, it completely removes the threat of social rejection.
Because the teacher can't judge them.
Think about real-world conversations at the A2 level. You try to order a coffee, you conjugate the verb wrong, and the barista furrows their brow and says, "Excuse me, what?"
Ugh, that micro expression of confusion from a native speaker feels like a physical blow to a learner.
It really does. It spikes the anxiety and shuts down the willingness to try again.
But in this simulation, the audio teacher never frowns.
Never.
The audio teacher never interrupts to correct your pronunciation. The audio teacher always responds with validation.
You get the neurological repetitions and you practice the timing, the turn taking, the rapid formulation of thought, but you completely eliminate the social terror of messing up in front of a judging human being.
It is quite literally a flight simulator for conversation.
Hmm.
If you crash the plane in the simulator, nobody dies. You just reset and try again.
The psychological safety net is impenetrable.
So we've survived the gauntlet of output. The learner has decoded stories and simulated a 5-turn dialogue. The brain is undeniably fatigued at this point.
Oh, absolutely exhausted.
So the final sequence of the document, steps 6, 7, and 8, is designed to cool the engine down and somehow fuse all of this fleeting data into long-term memory.
The micro-targeting phase. This is where the structural rigidity of the document reaches its absolute peak.
It becomes almost mathematically obsessive. Step 6 is pronunciation focus. The teacher's commanded to select exactly 5 important words.
Not 4, not 6, 5.
Right. They must repeat each word twice, explicitly instruct the listener on which specific syllable requires stress, and provide one easy sentence.
Highly structured.
Then we hit step 7, the review. And the numerical precision here is just rigid. The teacher must review exactly 10 vocabulary words, 5 useful sentences, and 3 grammar points.
It's a very specific formula.
Why is the document so obsessed with these highly specific numbers at the very end of the process? Why not just say, review the key concepts?
Because review the key concepts is an ambiguous instruction, and ambiguity is the enemy of a fatigued brain.
That makes sense.
There is a psychological principle known as the Zeigarnik effect. Have you heard of it?
The Zeigarnik effect. No, what is that?
It's a principle which states that humans remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks much better than completed tasks. An uncompleted task creates underlying cognitive tension.
Like when a TV show ends on a massive cliffhanger, and you literally can't stop thinking about it until the next season.
That is the Zeigarnik effect in action. So apply that to learning. After an intense 45-minute lesson of wrestling with a foreign language, the learner's brain is swimming in a soup of half-remembered words, grammar fragments, and phonetic sounds.
It's just chaos up there.
If you leave the review open-ended, if you just say, review the key concepts, the brain feels like the task is unfinished. The cognitive tension remains.
The learner walks away feeling like they're holding a messy handful of sand, and it's just slipping through their fingers. They wonder, did I miss the most important part? Am I supposed to memorize everything?
Exactly. It creates anxiety. But when the teacher introduces a finite, highly structured checklist, we are reviewing exactly 10 words, 5 sentences, 3 grammar points. You are drawing a hard boundary around the knowledge.
Oh, I see.
You're telling the learner's brain, this is the exact circumference of what you needed to extract from today's session, nothing more.
It transforms an overwhelming nebulous experience into a highly achievable checklist. When they mentally tick off word number 10, they get a dopamine hit of completion.
It creates closure.
Yeah.
It allows the working memory to finally relax and begin the slow process of long-term consolidation.
But the document isn't quite finished with the neurological workout,
No, it is not.
because step 8 is the homework, and it contains 2 fascinating mechanics. The homework assigns 5 speaking questions, 5 shadowing sentences, and 1 short writing task of exactly 50 words.
Again, with the strict numbers.
Always. I want to tackle shadowing first, because it sounds like espionage, but it's actually a vital linguistic tool. What is happening in the brain when a learner shadows a sentence?
Shadowing is a technique where the learner listens to an audio sentence through headphones and attempts to repeat the sentence out loud simultaneously.
Simultaneously.
Yes, you are shadowing the native speaker's voice with only a microsecond delay. You aren't listening, pausing, and repeating. You are talking over them, trying to perfectly mimic their intonation, pitch, and rhythm.
It's like trying to sing along perfectly to a fast song on the radio, even if you don't fully know all the lyrics.
That is the perfect analogy. And the neurological reason it works is that it effectively bypasses the analytical processing centers of the brain.
How so?
When you shadow, you aren't thinking about grammar. You aren't worrying about whether you should use the past perfect tense.
You don't have time to worry.
Exactly. You are engaging mirror neurons and targeting pure auditory muscle memory. You are training the physical articulators, the jaw, the tongue, the soft palate, to move in the complex kinetic patterns required by the target language.
You are building the physical muscle of the language without the cognitive weight of the rules.
It's a purely physical repetition.
So the 5 shadowing sentences keep the auditory and kinetic momentum flowing. But then, in the very last breath of the blueprint, the framework violently shifts gears.
The final twist.
In a lesson plan entirely dedicated to audio input, vocal output, and speaking confidence, the final instruction is a writing task. Write 50 words about the topic. Why introduce a completely different medium at the very end?
Modality shifting.
Modality shifting, meaning changing the way you interact with the data.
Precisely. Up until this point, the entire cognitive load has been handled by the auditory and verbal pathways. Listening and speaking are fundamentally transient activities. The sound waves hit your eardrum, the processing occurs, and the sound just vanishes into the ether.
Right, it's gone the second it's spoken.
By forcing a writing task, you demand a complete cognitive shift.
You are forcing the brain to route the exact same information through a completely different set of neural highways.
Exactly. Writing forces the learner to take those transient, fleeting auditory skills and translate them into a tangible, permanent visual output.
Because you can look back at the sentence you just wrote.
Yes. And the motor skills required to hold a pen or type on a keyboard engage different areas of the cortex. Furthermore, writing demands a level of structural organization that speaking does not.
Oh, that's true. When you speak, you can rely on tone of voice and pauses to convey meaning.
Right, or you can just wave your hands around to make a point. But when you write, you have to actively engage with spelling, punctuation, and syntax. This cross-training, taking auditory input and forcing a structured visual output, is one of the most robust methods discovered by cognitive science to cement fragile short-term information into resilient long-term memory.
And keeping it to a strict 50-word limit ensures that it functions purely as a brief neurological reinforcement exercise.
Right, rather than spiraling into a daunting essay.
Because an essay would resurrect the anxiety we spent the entire lesson trying to kill.
Precisely. It is the final, heavy deadbolt locking the vocabulary into the brain.
It is an incredibly elegant design.
It really is a masterpiece of instructional engineering.
So we have deconstructed this entire A2 blueprint. We've looked at the conversational straitjacket of the 5 to 12 word limit. We've explored the necessity of explicit goal setting to open those mental filing cabinets.
Right.
We've discussed the dual speed storytelling, the ingenious flight simulator of the blank conversation, the dopamine hit of the 10-word review, and the absolute undeniable tyranny of the 5-second pause.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. When you step back and view this architecture as a whole, what is the ultimate insight here?
The ultimate insight is that we are looking at a masterclass in human cognitive capacity. This document understands that when an adult attempts to learn something fundamentally alien, their greatest enemy is not a lack of intelligence.
Right. It's not that they aren't smart enough.
No, and it's not a lack of motivation either. Their greatest enemy is cognitive overload and the biological anxiety response it triggers.
The effective filter.
Yes. This framework creates a flawless psychological safety net. It balances input, output, and reflection through strict pacing and mandatory pauses. It ensures that the learner feels endlessly supported, never overwhelmed, and constantly capable of success.
And I think that brings us to the core of why you, listening to this deep dive right now, should care about a blueprint for A2 English learners.
Because it applies to everything.
It really does, because the vast majority of us are not ESL teachers. But every single day, we are tasked with transferring information from our brains into the brains of other people.
And frankly, most of us are terrible at it.
We really are.
We suffer from the curse of knowledge.
Exactly, the curse of knowledge. We assume that because a concept is crystal clear in our own minds, It will be instantly understood by the listener, regardless of how fast we talk or how much jargon we use.
We just expect them to keep up.
Think about the real-world applications of this blueprint. Imagine you were training a new employee on a highly complex proprietary software system.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
If you sit them down and barrage them with a 20-minute unbroken monologue filled with company idioms and 50-word run-on sentences, you are overflowing their buffer.
You are triggering their effective filter.
You are ensuring that they retain absolutely nothing.
But what if you applied this framework?
Right. What if you started by explicitly stating, in the next 10 minutes, you will learn how to process a single invoice?
That opens the right filing cabinet.
What if you kept your instructions to under 12 words? What if you removed the corporate jargon?
It would change everything.
And most importantly, what if you showed them a step and then actually paused in agonizing silence for 5 seconds to let their working memory process what they just saw?
It would revolutionize corporate training. It would revolutionize familial communication, even just arguing politics with a friend. We fail to provide the scaffolding.
We refuse to use the conversational training wheels because we are in such a desperate rush to impart our own brilliance.
We prioritize our desire to speak over the listener's biological need to process.
Which leaves me with a final, slightly uncomfortable thought. I want you to carry with you today as you interact with your colleagues, your family, or anyone you're trying to explain something to.
It's a good question to ask yourself.
If this highly structured, fiercely restricted, pause-heavy method is scientifically proven to be the most effective way to make a struggling brain feel confident and capable of absorbing new realities, how much of the miscommunication, the frustration, and the friction in your daily life is happening simply because you are refusing to use these basic rules?
Are you overwhelming the buffer?
Are you talking too fast, using too many words, and constantly, chronically forgetting to leave a 5-second pause?